Acknowledging that we reside in the homelands of Indigenous peoples is an important step in recognizing the history and the original stewards of these lands. Land acknowledgements must extend far beyond words. The United States has worked hard to erase the narratives of Indigenous peoples over time. Land acknowledgement statements can help to remind us of the history, the the history, excuse me, the contributions and the sacrifices Native peoples have made. We honor and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne Arapaho and Ute nations. This area, specifically the confluence of the Platte and Cherry Creek rivers, was the epicenter for trade, information sharing, planning for the future, community, family, and ally building, as well as conducting healing ceremonies for over 45 Indigenous nations, including the Lakota, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, Shoshone, Paiute, Zuni, Hopi, among others. We must recognize Indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land, and as these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, remember the ties these nations still have to their traditional homelands. Let us acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory and pay our respect to the diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land. Let us also give thanks to all tribal nations and the ancestors of this place. This was provided by Gracie Redshirt Town, who is the Director of American Indian Student Services. And to go over some community guidelines, the first one is I will lean into conversations. I will believe everyone is doing their best. I will critique ideas, not people. I will use I statements. I will accept a lack of closure. I will not make assumptions about other people's identities. I will take care of myself and take breaks if I need to. I will agree that what is shared here stays here, and what is learned here leaves here. And then we also have the community guidelines on the slides just as a reference there. And I'm going to go ahead and put these in the chat. Alrighty. Alrighty, so the community guidelines are now in there. I would ask that if you have any questions during the presentation, you're welcome to privately chat them to me, and I can bring them up later with Dr. Sarcedo. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sarcedo, and we can begin. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. All right, welcome everybody. We'll start off with a little bit about me to kind of ground where I'm going today. So a little bit about me. I very recently completed the PhD in Education and Human Development right here at CU Denver, as in like 2 weeks ago. So I'm still riding that high. I am also an academic advisor in our School of Education and Human Development. I've taught in our first year experience program in the School of Education, and most recently, I designed and taught our Mixed Families and Communities course here in Ethnic Studies in fall 2019. I always like to share that my research interests, my academic and professional sides, are really grounded in my identity as a mixed woman of color in particular, and as a mother as well. And so you'll learn a little bit about my child later as we talk about this. So I like to say, like, this is who I am, and I'm bringing those parts of me into our discussion today. So let us get into some definitions. Thinking about what colors our experience, so to speak, we'll start off talking a little bit about phenotype. So this is what you look like. This is your physical appearance. Like the science of it, this is based on your interaction between your genes and your environment. But what it comes down to is this is what you look like, your physical appearance. So this can be skin color and even skin type. So dry skin, oily skin, combo skin. We're thinking about hair texture and color, eye color. things like freckles versus dimples versus like different wrinkles in the face, which are just normal and natural to you. And all of those different things play out into the way we are treated based on how we look. And those two elements of how we are treated based on how we look can be defined as colorism, and that happens within a pigmentocracy. So colorism, if we're thinking about it, this is more on the prejudice and discrimination that is based on skin color. It can be based on other physical attributes as well, such as hair texture. And this is typically against individuals with darker skin or what's considered kinkier hair. This as a concept can be among people of the same ethnic or racial groups, as well as between different groups. So like as a good example, two people who are considered Black fall on different places on a color spectrum. They would have different experiences with prejudice and discrimination based on their skin color, even though we would consider them both Black. And we'll get into some examples of these later. So if you're thinking about colorism, that's more the umbrella. Pigmentocracy is how this essentially maps into a social hierarchy. So that would take your skin tone, maybe some of those other physical attributes could be a wider nose, as I mentioned, kinkier hair, where now those with lighter skin tones and what is often more considered beautiful, that those are privileged and they have power regardless of someone's socioeconomic status or what race and ethnicities they belong to. This is really based on what you look like determines how you are treated. And that kind of dual impact of colorism and pigmentocracy really do come into play specifically for mixed folks. So how does this come into play? Well, for starters, both pigmentocracy and colorism, bottom line, are rooted in anti-Black racism and white supremacy, even when this is perpetrated by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. So as easy as it is to think of like, oh, this is a racist thing, that means only white folks can do it, only the people who benefit from anti-Black racism and white supremacy, but that includes folks of color within that, because anybody can perpetrate these things because we exist within a racist system. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just a white person who is perpetrating these harms. Folks of colors within our own communities can do this. Even within our own families, this happens. This is when, based on your appearance as a mixed person, the way you are treated is different. This can be because of having a darker skin tone or a different skin tone than other family members. This can be because you are seen as darker, as less beautiful, as less important, simply because of the color of your skin, compared to folks who have the same mix of races and ethnicities as you, and they are treated differently because they look different. Their ideal beauty may be closer to what is considered beautiful within white supremacy and anti-Black racism. And one important thing I want to point out here is, even though monoracial, so folks who are not mixed, they have one racial identity, they can experience pigmentocracy and colorism because they lack that intersectional identity of mixed identities or mixed race identities. The way they experience those things is markedly different than how mixed folks experience this. So now I want to get into a couple of stories. Tell you, when we think about what these experiences mean, what does that actually look like? And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about, or some stories from my background, because how your appearance affects your treatment, how colorism and pigmentocracy play out within your own experience and within families as mixed folks, we see lots of variation, tons of variation based on what different people in your family look like. their different intersectional identities. So this can be gender, this can be socioeconomic status, and various identities also play a role in there. And one other way we see this playing out is through the erasure of mixed identities. And so that is, we exist in a monoracial world that treats people on the assumption that everyone is just one thing. And if you're not just one thing, there's something wrong with you. And so it's very common to just have, well, you're not a person of color, you're Black. You're not these two mixes. I'm denying your identity. And that can play out as part of colorism and pigmentocracy. So a couple of the stories I want to share from my own experience. So the pictures you see here, this is me with my daughter. She's currently 4 years old, and her father is mixed white and Chilean. And so her appearance, some people have said she looks white, some people have said she looks racially ambiguous. But she is my child, regardless of what other people say, regardless of how she looks. And I've had the experience of being out with her in public, and I mean, there's no easy way to say this. Like, I've legit been asked if I'm a nanny, where I'm like, that's my child. Like, I was there when she was born. I'm very sure I'm not her nanny. And it's seen as a compliment. Like, oh, you're so good with her. Are you taking on any other clients? Like, this happened to me while I was at a playground with my child when she was about 1.5, 2 years old. And the reaction of this woman when I was like, oh, I'm not a nanny, like that's my child. I've been asked if she's adopted. Nope, not adopted. I birthed her. Like I'm certain of this. And the funny thing is, people will ask with suspicion, like I must be lying. And it's because of my phenotype versus her phenotype. My 4-year-old has noticed that she has been treated differently when she's with her white passing father than when she is with me. And if a 4-year-old can, catch on to this, that it's prevalent and that it's out there. So this other picture here, this is my brother. So full biological brother, same mix of identities. So we are Black, Puerto Rican, and Native Hawaiian. And when his hair is longer and you get to see his curl pattern, that's the only time my brother gets asked, what are you? That quintessential question we as mixed folks get asked. And when his hair is shorter, is pictured here, he's just raced as Black. Nobody assumes that he's mixed. And this is my niece with him, who's just 5 months older than my own daughter. And or rather I should say, their experience, he's never had to defend his parentage. He's never been asked if that's his child, because they are perceived as the same race. Even though, so her mother is also Black and Puerto Rican mixed, speaks Spanish, lived in Puerto Rico for a number of years. And so her experience of being mixed is very different than my own daughter's experience of being mixed, simply because of what they look like, even though their mixes are fairly comparable. When I mentioned that erasure of possible identities, that's what's the experience of my brother, where nobody asks him if he's mixed. It's not assumed. Versus with me, based on my appearance, I have curly hair, but it's considered mixed hair. Those different things, those physical attributes impact the way that I am treated. And okay, I'm going to tell this story because I find it kind of humorous. Because this doesn't all have to be bad necessarily. At times we need to find humor in those experiences. So imagine this. I'm at a Indian restaurant with a friend who is Chinese and Black mixed. And he frequently gets mistaken for Indian. We're at an Indian restaurant. They come, they ask our order. And when they get my order, they ask, how spicy do you want that? And I'm like, okay, medium is fine. I notice now, in retrospect, they didn't ask my friend how spicy he wanted his curry. And they bring it out, and I'm enjoying it, I'm eating it, and my friend is sitting there, and this poor guy looks like he is dying, like he is suffering, and he's too polite, he doesn't want to say anything. And so our waiter comes by and asks like how the food is, and the waiter notices like something ain't right with my friend and asks him about it, and my friend, with tears almost streaming down his face, it's like, why is this so spicy? Like he's dying. And the waiter like profusely, like profoundly apologizes and says like, I'm so sorry, I thought you were a countryman, so I made this Indian hot for you. And there's my friend, like again, tears streaming down his face at this point, and grown man crying like, I'm not Indian. And snot coming out of his nose because it's way too hot for him. And now we look back on this experience with humor because someone made an assumption based on the way he looks. And they made a positive assumption. They thought, you're like me, I'm going to treat you like family. And that was not the correct play in this instance. And so you do want to be mindful of when things are happening, when assumptions are made based on what people look like. Sometimes, sure, it could be good. Most of the time, though, because we know this is rooted in white supremacy and anti-Black racism, there are undertones to those assumptions. And those are some things that we need to be aware of and start to question. All right, so we're about to get into the discussion piece here. So you've heard a little bit about my stories that I've experienced as a mixed person, a little bit about my family, some of my friends, and I want to have a group discussion. I want to learn a bit of what does this all mean, right? So as we are thinking about colorism and pigmentocracy, to wrap this up, I like to put it out there. So if you benefit from colorism and pigmentocracy, so you are lighter skinned, regardless of your actual racial makeup, if you benefit from pigmentocracy and colorism, to think about how you might use your privilege for darker skinned folks, for folks with broader noses and kinkier hair. How are you able to help their experience by using your privilege? So think about that. Relevant to some of the things we've talked about here is you may have to check some of your family members. It's not uncommon for, these are people, they're part of your family, they're related to you, and you love them, but they say and think some problematic things. Being willing to have that conversation, and especially grounded from a place of love, like, I know you love me, but this is why what you said or what you did was problematic. With my family in particular, one of the easier ways to start that conversation is to just say, would you say that in front of other family member with a different identity? And most of the time people will scurry like, oh no, I wouldn't. And then you gotta ask why. Why was that okay to say in front of me if you wouldn't say it in front of our cousin, our mom, our sister, or whoever? So think about that. So checking your family members is definitely part of that as well. I like to always say you want to practice self-care and community care in the face of colorism and pigmentocracy. So there will be times where you need to take a step back and take care of yourself. You need to step in and take care of your community and family members, because we are all faced with this, whether you benefit from it or not, whether you are dark skinned, light skinned, and everyone in between, we're all impacted by colorism and pigmentocracy. So being able to take care of yourself and those who you care about, I think is really important in this continued struggle. A couple of disclaimers that I always like to put in there. And this gets touted. You see it quite often like, oh, well, you want to fight racism, have a mixed baby. That is not fighting racism. That's not the way this works. And so the mere existence of mixed race people does not prevent or address colorism and pigmentocracy. Oftentimes, our identities as mixed folks are used to uphold and maintain anti-Black racism and white supremacy. And so we have to be cognizant of that and to resist that. And some of that goes back to thinking about who benefits and where they can use their privilege versus who does not, and calling it out when you see it. But it really comes down to understanding that your identity as a mixed person should never be weaponized to maintain anti-Black racism and to maintain white supremacy. And oftentimes that does happen beyond our control. So as you are going out into the world and thinking about these things, it's just important to remember, so colorism and pigmentocracy, quite honestly, are everywhere. They're everywhere. And it's something you will always have to contend with. And based on the way that you look, will interact and interrupt and interfere with your experience of that and the way other people experience that as well. So these are all little pieces of that problem that is achievable to solve, I think. I'm hopeful that as we move forward, that as you think about these ideas as individuals and then as a society, it's something that will get better. But knowing that they exist as they are now, we have an opportunity as individuals, whether mixed or monoracial, to address this in our everyday lives. And as we continue that, I think that this is an issue that will get better. So with that, thank you for being here with us today. I am greatly appreciative. If you have questions or comments, I do have my contact information here. You are welcome to email me. If you are on Twitter, I am on Twitter as well. I have a professional website that you are welcome to visit if you want to learn more about me as well. I will hang around for a little bit and answer any questions, but that is it for today. So thank you so much.